listening to Dallas Theological Seminary's Chapel Podcast.
It's great to have one of our Christian education professors, Jay Sedgwick, back with us from his sabbatical to be a part of this week. Dr. Sedgwick, come and introduce our speaker, would you? Even with the shades.
As Dr. Bailey mentioned, I'm on sabbatical this year. Figured I'd dress the part. He called me from the beach cottage, Seminary-provided beach cottage in Hawaii, where I'm on my sabbatical. Thank you, Dr. Bailey. The rest of y'all didn't get that when you were on sabbatical? I'm sorry about that. Anyway, looking forward to a great week in chapel, Youth Week, youth emphasis. Today we have Don Smarto. I'll introduce him in just a moment, but let me highlight the other three speakers from this week and some of the things that we're going to be doing. Tomorrow, our chapel speaker will be Dr. Jay Strack. Jay Strack has the unique claim of speaking to more teenagers in the country than any other youth speaker alive. Travels the country, travels the world, started an organization called Student Leadership University, and they've trained over 100,000 teenagers in leadership skills. He will be our speaker tomorrow. You don't want to miss that. Then on Thursday, a little bit of a shift. One of the things that you'll hear from me if you take any of my youth ministry classes is that adolescence continues on through college. Most scientists, social scientists today say adolescence lasts into the 23, 24, 25-year-old range, which means I'm looking at some adolescents there. Anyway, but what we're going to do is bring in Max Barnett, Dr. Max Barnett, who is, I would say, the guru of college ministry in the country. And he's going to speak on Thursday about college ministry, an often overlooked area of what we would call student ministry or youth ministry. So you want to be here Thursday to hear Max Barnett speak. And then Friday, a little shilling here for my own church, First Baptist Dallas. My own youth minister, Jeremiah Raymer, is going to speak to you all on Friday. He has an incredible track record of success, took a ministry from 250 to 500 in just 2 short years. And he's doing the same thing. He's turned our youth ministry at First Baptist around in a short 6 months. We've gone from about 150 up to 250. And just the Lord's hand is on this man. And he's going to come and speak to us on Friday as well. Another fun thing that we're doing this week is brown bags. We're having brown bags today. You'll have an opportunity to do some Q&A with Don after he's finished. Tomorrow, Dr. Strack could not be with us for a brown bag, but he's graciously agreed to come early and meet with any students at 9:15. Hopefully you got one of these fancy cards that we had printed up and handed out last week that tells you where to go. Tomorrow, or the brown bags all week will be in Todd 114, but tomorrow morning at 9:15, it'll be in Campbell 203. We will have donuts. That'll be a little incentive to get you there. And we'll have pizza at the brown bags after today's chapel and Thursday and Friday's chapel as well. So come on if you didn't bring your lunch, or even if you did, come on anyway. And another fun thing, we're going to give away an 8 gig iPod Touch on Friday. Every time you come to a brown bag, you get to fill out a form and turn that in, and at the end of the week, so every brown bag you come to, that's 4 entries, your odds increase, and on Friday we're going to make a drawing and give away an 8 gig iPod Touch. So there's a little more incentive for you to come and interact with some of the speakers that we've brought in for the week. Let me introduce today's speaker. This is Don Smarto. He is the president of Direct Ministries. He's the author of 11 books, featured articles for major reference works in psychology and sociology, and for magazines like Christianity Today, Decision Magazine, Moody Monthly, and Christian Counseling. He holds degrees in music, philosophy, and psychology, and has taught sociology at Wheaton College for 12 years. He was a featured speaker at the White House Conference in 2008, and as an evangelist, he's spoken to over 150,000 delinquent youth who are incarcerated in 18 different states. Don has been the host of a Christian talk show on Dallas-Fort Worth Radio for 7 years on K-Word and WBAP called Parenting Today's Youth, interviewing over 1,000 guests during that time. And I've had the privilege of being interviewed one time by him. So without further ado, let's give Don Smarto a DTS welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jay, President Bailey, faculty, students. It's a privilege to be here with you. I was mildly amused by this card. It had the question, Is working with youth like swimming with sharks for you? Well, without a question, the young people I work with are considered by society as sharks because they're all felony offenders, and my specialty is going into youth prisons. But for me personally, working with these youth is like swimming with dolphins. It is a pure joy in the Lord. One of the things that I do, and I just came back from a major campaign in another city where we did 4 juvenile facilities, is this is a generation raised on video games and media, and they're very visual. So I always use visual, you might call them parables or stories, and with your indulgence, today I'm going to show you what I shared with the youth for the most part last week. It says in Proverbs 4 that we ought to take instruction and wisdom from our fathers. My father told me, take my words to heart. Verse 14 says, do not do as the wicked do or follow the path of the evildoers. But I ask you a question this morning. What if you have a father that encourages you to follow the evil path, who tells you that wickedness is actually a value and is good? We've all heard this phrase, like father, like son. How does a child learn to cheat or lie or steal? Every story has a background story, and this is the story of a man named Billy Lewis. And at age 12, he was chronically truant. He was having sex by the age of 14, smoking by age 15, drinking alcohol at 16, gambling at 17, and at the age of 19 declared there was no God, and was from that point on an atheist. Every story has characters. You'll follow the lines up there. That is his grandfather, his father, his mother, and his brother, who all play a part in who he would become. He becomes one of the great criminals in America. In fact, the FBI searched for him for many years. He was considered dangerous. He did something that no one else in America has ever done, which I'll show you in a moment. And it comes from a book called Pursued that came out in the early 90s, and that in turn became a motion picture made for TV called The Perfect Score in 2004. So, how did generations in this family all have the same traits of anger and rage, violence, a gambling addiction, bitterness, an unforgiving spirit, which they called a vendetta, and alcoholism? Well, in psychology, they would say it's learned behavior. In sociology, they would say it's the influence of environment. In genetics, they would say it's inherited physical traits. In biology, they talk about the chemical neurotransmitter imbalance. In criminology, we talk about antisocial peers and the effect they have on criminality. In education, we often say that learning disorders can contribute to delinquency. Even in economics, we say that deprivation and poverty can lead to criminal behavior. And in behaviorism, we talk about abnormal conditioning. And in psychiatry, cognitive pathology, which means the wrong way of thinking. But sometimes the simplest theory that fits the facts, in this case, comes from theology, and it's called the generational curse. Now, a lot of people will say, well, I don't believe in a generational curse. And my question would be, do you believe in the influence of the evil one? Do you believe that certain families have inherited certain tendencies? You've heard the phrase, like father, like son, chip off the old block, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Actually, the phrase, like father, like son, goes back to 1621. Am I not a child of the same Adam, a chip of the same block with him, said Bishop Sanderson in 1621. The Lord is slow to anger, it says in Numbers, and abounding in steadfast love, forgiving iniquity and transgressions. But he will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and the fourth generation. Well, one thing we know for sure, there are effects of sin that tend to run in certain families. So here are 3 generations that all had problems with anger, alcoholism, stealing, gambling, and violence. This is the grandfather of Billy Lewis, Guglielmo Capitelli. Guglielmo is Italian for William. And I would say that he opened the door to the bondage to sin that this family would have. In fact, he comes from Palermo, Sicily, and about 100 years ago arrives by steamship after a 21-day voyage in 1910. And he settles in Chicago and soon has a business arrangement with one of the greatest mob leaders in the history, actually, of the world, Al Capone, who by today's economy was making $3.1 billion. What was the business arrangement? Well, it had to do with a law that was written into the U.S. Constitution, and it was called prohibition. We had decided, called the Homestead Act, that we would not, in fact, manufacture alcohol anymore. And what Guglielmo did was he started to put stills in the basements of all his Sicilian relatives and friends, and eventually with the family on Taylor Street, they form a distillery. And so they were supplying Capone with the illegal alcohol. The next thing that opened the door to sin was this man with the steely eyes, who by all accounts killed 500 men. He was a hitman, and he was the enforcer for Guglielmo, again opening the door to a tremendous sin. Now, loyalty to the family meant more than anything. It meant more than loyalty to your country, and certainly even loyalty to God. And being a Sicilian family, and this is Guglielmo in the middle, he essentially held court. So it was important that everybody be attending weddings, anniversaries, Sunday meals, birthdays, baptisms, funerals, Thanksgiving, and of course, Christmas as well. Now, this is the Capitelli home, which was the scene of many parties and celebrations and dinners and the celebrations that I just referenced. But it was also the hiding place for killers. When any of these professional hitmen did something, it was in the basement of that home on Austin Avenue in Chicago where the killers, in fact, were hidden. Now, Guglielmo begins to have a family, and his first of three children is a daughter, and her name is Rosa. And Rosa, actually, as a minor, becomes what is called in the 1920s a flapper, and she is dancing in speakeasies by the age of 14. And she's quite frequently dancing with these four men. And all four of these men have something in common. They're all hitmen. She knows it. Her father knows it. And it's just part of the family way. These were Capone's enforcers. And these, in fact, were their weapons. The weapon, of course, of choice was the Tommy gun, invented by General Thompson. The rotary drum has 145 caliber bullets that fire in 6 to 10 seconds. This might surprise you, but in the 1920s it was perfectly legal to own. It cost $100, and you could buy it at the drugstore. So that is what made them essentially so powerful. Now, when all these cars and all these limos appear near the Capitelli house, they know that something special is going to happen. There's going to be a party. There's also a lot of bodyguards in attendance. But at this party in particular, Rosa is dancing with these two men. These two men together have a nickname. They're called the Homicide Squad. And they're trying to figure out the solution to a problem. And the problem is that Capone has the south side of Chicago, which is Cicero, but he wants the whole city. And Bugs Moran is running the north part of the city. And so the solution is going to be that they're going to visit the gang at a garage. They're going to pretend to be police officers. And this, in fact, they're going to have Tommy guns concealed under their coats. And this is a scene from a motion picture showing the four people who, once they lined them up against the wall, they shot all these guys in the back. The next picture is not from a motion picture. This is the actual St. Valentine's Day Massacre, in which they had wiped out the North Side gang. And it actually became headlines all over the country. And it was the photo was taken by this teenager who was a good friend of Guglielmo and said, 9 o'clock tomorrow, you're going to get a really great photo. You simply go to this address. And Guglielmo hid the assassins, all four of them, in the basement of their apartment. Now, how did they get away with so much? They bribed the police. By all accounts, Capone was paying 75% of the Chicago police force in the 1920s. 75% were on the take. You see, here's an important thing. When good people sell out, that is how evil thrives. And in fact, during the 1920s, Capone had in his pocket of Cook County, which is Chicago, the chief judge, the mayor of the city of Chicago, the chief of police, and the governor of the state of Illinois. By all accounts, Illinois is still having problems with governors, but that's another story. So next from Palermo, Sicily, comes Matteo. And Matteo is a professional gambler, actually a gambling addict. And he soon falls in love with Rosa, who you'll remember is the oldest daughter of Guglielmo. And they intend to get married someday, and she dreams of getting married in a church wearing a nice dress. But as Billy grows up, he notices that nowhere in the home is a wedding photo. And there's a reason for that. And it goes back to the fact that Matteo said, you know, there's a movie, a very popular movie called It Happened One Night with Clark Gable. Would you like to see it? And she said, I'd love to see the film. Well, I'm going to come by at 6 p.m. And in fact, he comes up to the house at 6 p.m., and she goes into the car and looks at something in the back seat, and it frightens her. She sees a person. She knows exactly who this is. And he has on his lap a 38 caliber revolver. That is Sammy. He's the loan shark enforcer and the bodyguard for Matteo, and she now is going to be married at gunpoint across state lines. So she gets married by a justice of the peace. Remember, her father works for Al Capone. How happy is her father? Not very happy. In fact, he puts out a hit on Matteo. That is, he wants him killed. And as a result, the new couple have to go to New York City, where they hide for 10 years. And it's during those 10 years that they're going to have 3 children. The first, this one here, is his name is Vincenzo, and he's the firstborn son. And the next one is Billy. He's the subject of our story, Billy Lewis. And then the third one is Dominic. He's the third son. Any of you who are the youngest in your family know that you're called the baby of the family. And so essentially, the third one got a lot of attention, although we're talking about Billy. And the family really just adored him. And of course, we're grooming him to take over the family for the future. Finally, there's a truce after 10 years. Matteo can come back, and when he does, his drinking increases. He's an alcoholic. He drinks an average of 6 bourbons a night. And his bartender is his youngest son, who gives him all the drinks from the moment he comes in the door. But he does bring him places as a father. He brings him to a bookie joint on an average of 3 to 4 times a week. He also brings him to the racetrack in Chicago, and he brings him to poker games. But during all 3 of those events, the youngest son always feels invisible. Because of his alcoholism and because of his gambling addiction, the youngest one doesn't feel like he's very, very important. So the youngest is being molded to take over the family. And you can see that the 2 older brothers, when we talk about a mentor, we mean that positively, but you can be a mentor for evil. And so they are mentoring and modeling truancy, smoking, alcohol, gambling, sex, and crimes. So by the age of 17, the youngest is now very angry and very violent, and the family's very pleased. Like father, like son. The youngest one is now becoming prepared to take over the family eventually. He has tremendous aggression. In fact, if you want to look again at a generational curse, he uses a fist, a broken bottle, and a gun on his peers and his classmates. So what happened to the youngest brother? The young people that I talk to usually assume that either he died or went to prison or became a mob boss. And those are the 3 logical choices. But there's an important part to the story. One day, the 2 older brothers said, let's go for a walk. These are full-blooded, 100% Sicilians. Going for a walk might sound very innocent, but you may not come back from the walk. And so they went out to a place where no one could see them, no one could hear them, and then Billy said, we have something for you, and the oldest brother reached into his pocket. The young people that I talked to always assumed that what he took out was a gun, but it was not. In fact, what he took out was $50,000 in cash. And he gave the $50,000 to the younger brother, saying, "You need to come in with us." And the youngest brother took the $50,000 in cash. $50,000 was a very small part of what the two brothers had, which was, in fact, $4 million. And they had already stolen the $4 million from 3 of these 4 Chicago banks. In fact, when I said that their crime was unique, they don't go up to the teller with a gun. They hide in the vault from Friday to Monday, and what they do is wipe out every safety deposit box. And so these were the only people in the history of America who committed a crime in that fashion. Now the youngest one understands finally what his family is all about. He understands that his family is mafia. And that people like Sam Giancana on the far right, who takes over the Chicago mob in the 1950s and 60s, is in fact mafia, as well as the grandfather and Al Capone and Angelo Genna, which we see in the bottom left. So Guglielmo gets married 6 times. And his second marriage is to Giancana's sister, so it just creates a greater bond. So the youngest one now notices that when he reads books, especially mafia books, he's recognizing family members in the books. And when he sees films about organized crime, he is seeing people who he knows as uncles and relatives as well. He reads about an uncle who's shot in the head, Sicilian mob style. Giancana is eventually slain for being a little too flamboyant by owning a nightclub. Billy Lewis's business partner is found killed. In fact, he's found in the trunk of an automobile. And finally, Billy himself, eventually, no one is so smart that they don't make mistakes. And eventually, Billy is caught in the 4th bank. And when he's captured in the 4th bank, it becomes headlines across Chicago. They had been searching for him for some time. Bank job, a perfect crime, almost. And then the youngest brother receives a letter. And when he opens the letter, it is in fact a subpoena. And it's a subpoena to testify before the grand jury. The family has only one reaction to this: don't do it. Well, he goes to the grand jury, and in fact, the next thing is that he is going to be subpoenaed to actually go to a trial. Now, all of you who have watched Perry Mason or any legal show, if you've never been in a courtroom, know that you raise your right hand and put your left hand on a Bible, and you swear the truth, to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. And of course, the family said, you have only one choice. When you put your hand on that Bible, you must lie for the family. Well, something changed. And what happened to the youngest brother was, the youngest brother accepted Jesus Christ as Lord. Well, that made some profound differences. It says, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone. The new is here. And so at first, the changes, you might say, were a process. And they started small. He stopped using profanity. Then he stopped smoking cigars. Then he stopped drinking alcohol. Then he had less anger. Now, all of those, you might say, are not momentous, but then because of his new conviction in following Jesus Christ, he had a more substantial change. He gave the money back. And when he did, his oldest brother, Vincenzo, went into a rage. He grabbed him by the lapels, then started choking him so tightly that the capillaries in his eyes burst and blood formed in his eyes. But the brother insisted that following Christ was more important than following the family. And, the oldest brother said, you are a fool, you are an idiot. You will never have a sports car like we do. You'll never have boats like we do. You'll never have a lake house. You'll never wear a Rolex watch. But the youngest brother would not change his mind. He went into the court and he told the truth, and his brothers were sentenced to 22 years in prison. What happened to the youngest brother? Well, you might think because of such a close family knit, he experienced some rejection. Dietrich Bonhoeffer talks about the cost of discipleship. Jesus himself says, if you follow me, take up your cross. Well, the rejection by the family was pretty extreme. He was never invited to a Christmas celebration again. There was no Thanksgiving dinners for the future, no birthday parties. He was never invited to another family wedding. He was never invited to a baptism, never invited to a wedding anniversary or a meal for 31 years. We all know the story of Joseph. We know the hatred that his brothers had for Joseph and the bitterness and the rejection. Even when the oldest brother died, he was banned from the funeral and could not come to his own brother's funeral. Such was what we call the Sicilian vendetta, based upon bitterness and hatred. In no way like the biblical reconciliation or forgiveness we read about. No forgiveness was in fact possible. Well, this is Dominic when he was very small. And there were really two plans for his life. The one plan was the plan that his family had for him, which was to take over the family operations. And the other plan was that God had a plan for his life. It says in Jeremiah, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." The story that I told you this morning is a true story. And you know, when I tell it to young people, well, they find it very hard to believe. What they find hard to believe is that anybody could give back $50,000. But they find it even harder to believe that anybody could break with a crime family that goes back 100 years. But it is, in fact, a true story. Because I read it in the book Pursued? No. It is a true story because I wrote the book. Because, in fact, I'm the youngest brother. The movie made for TV called The Perfect Score was based upon the book that I wrote called Pursued. In fact, this is a Broadway actor, Vince Neroni, who played my brother in the motion picture. This is me at 17 years of age, and this became the cover of a book called Family Secrets, which we've distributed to thousands of youth all across the country. This is where they planned the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. That's the home that I was raised in. This is Guglielmo, who worked for Al Capone. That's my grandfather. This is Rosa, who began entertaining the mob as a minor. That's my mother. This is Matteo, the professional gambler. That's my father. This is Bloody Angelo, who killed about 500 men. That's my cousin. This is Sam Giancana, head of the mob. Actually, we weren't related. I just always thought of him as an uncle when I served him drinks when I was 5 and 6 years old. And this is Billy Lewis. I simply didn't give you his full name. That's his middle name. His full name is Billy Lewis Smarto because that, in fact, is my brother. And this is the headstone of my oldest brother who died a year and a half ago and was the getaway driver for the crimes. It says in Galatians 3, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone who is hung on a pole. Well, I like to think of the phrase like father, like son, as Jesus is a reflection of his heavenly Father. And by the grace of God, every day I've tried to put on the mind of Christ. And it's not always been easy. But God has also given me tremendous blessings as well. As an example, in 1992, after the collapse of Moscow, I got to travel with Dr. Billy Graham. Together we went to Moscow, and I got to preach in all the juvenile prisons outside of Moscow. And then, in fact, went on, this is the warden in the middle, to preach in the largest prison in Moscow, which is Buterka, 6,500 prisoners. I didn't do it all at one time. I had to do it cell by cell, and there were 60 inmates in every cell. So it took me 6 days to get through the entire prison, and by the grace of God, many of those men accepted Jesus as Lord and Savior. I began 11 years ago, Youth Direct Ministries. I've now preached the gospel in 304 juvenile prisons in 18 states. Youth considered by many people beyond hope because they're angry, because they're violent, because they have missing fathers. I identify with these youth because I've been there. I had a father who was missing. I was violent myself. I was an angry person. What has been one of the greatest purposes of my life? Well, in fact, we have had now 12,867 professions of faith from the young people that we work with. And the final two blessings is that God sent into my life a wonderful Christian woman, and we've been married for 35 years. And although my father never once said he loved me, although he never put his arm around me, my son and I just came back from a 15-day trip to Italy. And so every night he'd kiss me on the cheek and say, "I love you, Dad." And that is breaking a curse. Because you don't have, where you came from does not determine where you're going. Truth be told, I never did have the sports car, and I never had the yacht. I never had the lake house, and I'm certainly not wearing a Rolex. But I'm here today to tell you I'd rather have Jesus.